Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session this evening with Gonzalo Ruiz-Navarro. He is a wonderful artist and art educator. But before I do the introductions, just a couple of housekeeping things. Feel free to ask questions as we go, but do keep yourself muted until you're ready to ask the question. And Gonzalo has a presentation ready for us. He says he's built time in for addressing questions, so that's great. And now let me introduce him. Gonzalo is a representational painter based in the DC area. He specializes in oils, soft pastels, and drawings. He has a master's in fine arts from the University of Valencia, and he has studied drawing and painting in lots of other places, sometimes in the States, but mostly in Spain. His work is, I would say, traditional, but he also has a really great grasp of the abstract elements and the things that make his work contemporary and beautiful, and the light is so clear and fresh. Dynamic gestures. One of his favorite artists is Joaquin Sorolla. I didn't say it right. He'll correct me in a moment. But everybody knows Sorolla. He was a contemporary of John Singer Sargent, and some would argue he was way better. His paintings explore the themes of landscapes, portraits, still life, I guess pretty much everything. And there's a sense of movement in his work. It's in his brushwork, it's in his colors, and something he's going to share with us today is his sense of depth that his paintings have in his things. He exhibits widely in the US and in Spain, and more recently in Pakistan, where he generated quite a following, was on TV over there. His wife was stationed in Pakistan with the World Bank, and he went along for the ride and became a famous Pakistani artist, or I'm sorry, a famous artist in Pakistan. He has over 29 years of teaching. I've taken classes from him in the past, which I've enjoyed tremendously. And I think I learned something every time. My lovely wife, Lisa, says my paintings get better when I take a class with Gonzalo. And I agree. They're not good yet, but I'm getting there. So without further ado, Gonzalo, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Pat. That was a very nice introduction. And thank you very much to the Rockville Art League for inviting me to this presentation. Also, I would like to say hello to many people I see in the screen, and the names of some people I know because they take in my classes, or former students or colleagues. So thank you so much for being there. And today, I've been invited to do a lecture, and I thought it was a very interesting subject to talk about getting depth in your paintings, right? Because it's something that really always fascinated me. And I think many artists, we are trying to get that sense of that this is a different world that you can get in when you are in your painting. It's just not like a bunch of colors and shapes, but it's something that you have created that you can step in, right? And this reminds me of when I was a child, that I was interested in drawing mostly more than painting at the beginning. And I think I had a natural talent for drawing and perspective. And I could intuitively understand how the perspective work, and I tried to do things and copy things. And then when in the class, the teachers will start talking about perspective, I already knew a bit of that. And it was just that feeling that I guess in human history, the artists, they are trying to create this depth somehow and get to know these tricks about perspective or atmospheric perspective to create this illusion, right? So that's the subject of my lecture today. And I'm going to start sharing a presentation I have in a moment, okay? So let's get started with that. I'm going to share my screen. And here we have the presentation. I hope everybody can see it.
It looked great. We can see it.
Good, thank you. And as Pat mentioned before, I'm gonna talk about this. I have this presentation, but at the same time, I will encourage you to participate with your questions or comments. Okay, I'm gonna be looking at my screen, not at your faces, so I will not see you if you raise your hand. But if you wanna put something on the chat, maybe Lisa can help me to get those questions. And also, if you just want to unmute yourself and ask the question, you are very welcome to do it so we can do this more interactive. But anyway, so here is the title of my presentation, Creating Depth in Your Paintings, the Illusion of Space and Atmosphere. And I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna try to cover today. So first of all, I'm gonna give you a brief look at how artists have represented space through history. I think just to have a background about that. But then as we are artists, we are interested also in these techniques that we can use to give more depth to our paintings. So I'm gonna tell you a few of the basic things that you can do in your paintings to create more depth. And I will do it by showing you some samples of my work, as this one that you can see here. And then also I will show you some videos where you can see the process of my paintings and how I apply these techniques to create depth. Okay, and at the end, I will resume that with some takeaway tips that you can apply right away in your work. So let's get started with history. So history, artists, they have always wanted to create depth, to create the illusion that in a two-dimensional surface, you can look like it's three-dimensional. And we are gonna have a look at the techniques that they have used throughout history, very briefly, to achieve this depth. So, for example, we go to the, I think this is around the 1st century before Christ. It's a Roman fresco in Pompeii, where the techniques of, for example, perspective were not developed. But you can see, even in this image, where you can see figures that by overlapping, they create already a sense of that some are closer and some are farther away. So there is a bit of realism in the representation of the figures, but there is not in the space like a perspective, as we know, but there is a lot of play of the overlapping to create that. And that's something that, I mean, it's interesting to see in this painting and this work, that also is something that we can think about when we do our own work. Sometimes just overlapping things that maybe in our reference are not overlapping, then we can create immediately a sense of depth. But this is an early attempt to represent depth in a painting. But when in the Renaissance is when linear perspective was born. And we have this famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci, where you see the same figures, let's say, overlapping, and that creates depth. But we have also the perspective of the room, these receding lines that take you a vanishing point, and that gives adds this dimension of the architecture, creating the sensation of a space. Another sample is this by Raphael, just much more elaborated. And you can see in this sample that it's about figures, but they had I think a great time doing the perspective because they just knew how this could work, and they exploited it to this magnificent representation of the architecture. But keep in mind also that the perspective is not only creating space, but it's giving you some compositional element. If you see, all the receding lines are pointing to the main figures here, and in the previous one, all the receding lines are pointing to the main figure in the center. So this is giving us an idea that perspective can be used also as a compositional tool. At the same time, there was the discovery of atmosphere, the effect of the air in the depth of things. When we see something close up, will look different than something far away. They discover, like in this painting by Leonardo da Vinci, that the distant colors, they get lighter, they get cooler, there is less contrast. And this is what we call atmospheric perspective. There are other things like the edges in the distant mountains that you see, they are softer, and there is less detail in the background. So this is what we call aerial perspective or atmospheric perspective. And the Impressionist, just we jump in time to the last part of the historical part of this presentation. The Impressionists, they were fascinated about the effects of the light and the air and all the qualities that make things look closer, farther away. And you can see in this sample by Monet, the series of the Houses of Parliament, how he was so much interested in these effects of the atmospheric perspective. However, perspective is not necessary for some artists, because some artists ignore the depth or are not that interested in depth. They are interested in other things, and that's very valuable too. So normally when you are interested in depth, you are more like a realistic, impressionistic artist. But if you want to emphasize other things like color or line is an invention, it's not in reality, but line can be expressive. So you want to put line on it, on your paintings. You can put bright colors even in things that are in the background. You are not that interested in that depth. You are interested in other things, expression, color, a variety of things that are not necessarily representing depth. So we are talking today about depth and atmosphere and linear perspective, but that doesn't mean, as you obviously know, that you can have a really good painting without those characteristics. However, if you are a realistic or impressionistic artist like I am, so it's very interesting to know how to create depth. And I'm gonna start showing you a few simple things that are very basic and showing you some examples of my work. So this is a landscape, and there are many things involved about depth. There's a bit of perspective, but not that much. But in general, in this painting, you get the idea of depth because two things. One is the placement of things. So when you see things in the ground, the things that are closer to you, they will be lower, So basically, you see this tree is closer to us because it's lower than this tree, or this one is closer to us because it's lower than this one. So the placement of things give us sense of perspective. If they are lower or higher in the ground, but also the overlapping, as we mentioned before. So here there is a lot of overlapping. If you see this tree will overlap this part of the field here, this tree will cover part of the barn over there, this tree here will cover the silo, and the silo will cover the other tree. So by overlapping, you create a lot of different planes, even if you don't have more clues to give idea of a space. So these are basic things that sometimes we overlook because we think, oh, it's so obvious. But Maybe you have a still life, and the still life you want to create a bit more depth. Maybe just placing the elements one higher than the other in the ground or the table, that will give you an idea of a space. And by overlapping them, if you have two vases and they are not overlapping, it's a bit confusing which one is closer to you. So maybe you need to overlap them to create that sense of space. Another sample here, there is a bit of perspective in the boats, but basically, you know, this one here is closer to us because it's lower and a bit larger than the three ones in the background. Okay, just the placement and the change of size is giving you this spatial clues about the depth in a painting. Another sample of this, there is a lot of change in color and value, but also you see the trees, how they overlap, they block the river here in the front, or this tree blocks the mountain in the background. So the overlapping, it's very interesting to create depth. But we know there are other things to use, and one is, for example, linear perspective, where we talk about the paintings of Leonardo or Raphael. So this is one of my paintings, and I'm gonna just show you something that you probably know, the basic things about linear perspective. So when you have an image like this, you will have elements like the beams in the top, like I'm highlighting now, that if you continue them, they will meet in one point. And if you use other lines in the painting, like this wall on the left or the path at the bottom, they all should go to the same place, okay? And that place is what we call vanishing point. So all the lines that are in the architecture, as long as they are horizontal lines in nature, level lines, they will meet in a vanishing point, in the same vanishing point in this architecture. And another thing that it's basic is to know that that vanishing point will be always in the horizon line. And the horizon line, it should be there. And that tells you where is also your eye level. So if you are higher, your horizon line will be higher with you. So having these key concepts, it's very important to understand when you are painting from a reference. So where the vanishing point is, it's important to locate that where the horizon line or eye level is. Okay, I'm gonna give you another sample here. It's a bit similar, but in this case, you don't see the horizon. In the previous one, you could see the sky and the water, so you can locate the horizon here. But in the other one, you cannot do it. So, but it's similar here. You get different lines. They are gonna point and they are gonna meet in one point. Okay, and if you are painting this type of subjects, it's kind of, let's say, easy because you can put the vanishing point there, you can locate it, and then you can start drawing anything. Like, for example, if you see the lamps here, they also have to fit in that in those lines to be correct from a realistic point of view, or the pots here on the left. So that gives you an idea of the change of size of similar things. You have a pot here, and the next pot has to fit in the same receding lines. But sometimes it's a bit more difficult, like, for example, in this subject. So in this subject, you have the house in perspective, and you could draw a line from the top of the building here, and then from the bottom of the building, and you see there it's going to meet someplace, but it's far off. It's not on the image. So when you have this type of things, what I do is normally I just look at the angles of things and try, if I have something in front of me, and try to think that if I continue them, they are gonna meet with the other two lines that I have. For example, if I try to do the roof, I do that line with the angle that I see in the reference and thinking that it's gonna meet with the other two. or even the reflection of the building on the water. The perspective will go also to meet that place. And the windows, all the windows in the building, they should do the same thing. And here the challenge is that you have just to rely on the inclines, on the angles to draw it. But there are another tips that can help you. Look at this. If I go to the windows, like you see the difference between these lines and these lines. As I go higher from here, they get more slanted. And as I go lower, they get slanted on the other way, going up, okay? And that's because the horizon line, it's around here. So if you see, when the lines get closer, the receding lines, they closer to the horizon line, they get flatter, they get more horizontal. And as you go up, they get more slanted. And as you go down, more slanted. So if you have to draw another line, let's say the line of the door here, you will need to do something that is less slanted than this one, but a bit more slanted than this one, okay? So that's my way of thinking when I draw something and I cannot use the vanishing point because it's off the page. And I just guess it and I say, I'm gonna draw a line in between these two. It has to go in a slant that is in between these two. You could make the, I mean, in this case, I made the image smaller, and you could draw your vanishing point outside, but honestly, I don't think many people will do that. I don't do that. I just estimate things, but with a lot of practice, you don't get a perfect perspective, but you get something quite close so it looks real, okay? So at this point, I would like to see if anybody has any questions, or Lisa, if anybody is in the chat asking questions or comments, just give an opportunity.
There are no comments in the chat, but if anyone has.
Okay.
Yeah, I could ask one comment, make one question. I've heard there's 2-point perspective, and I once tried to do a drawing of the Metropolitan Museum or something in New York with the 2-point perspective, and now I've forgotten what that is.
That's a very good question. Thank you so much for asking. And actually, I mean, this is a lecture where I want to cover many things, and this is a subject very complex, just the linear perspective. I'm just giving you a basic and started with 1 point only here. But actually, for example, this house here that you see, the other side of the house, the left side, that the one that is in shadow, the lines in that side of the house will go to another vanishing point on the left, okay? And
okay.
that will be a 2-point perspective, okay? I'm gonna show you in the next slide. Let me see, the last slide. This is a bit more complex, okay? So you could take that building, you see these lines here, and you could find a vanishing point. I just put vanishing point 2 because there are many other here in this architecture that is more complex. Like, for example, if you get the lamppost, if you follow the lines, they will meet the top of this lamppost and the top of this one, and the bottom of this one and the bottom of that one. They will take you to another vanishing point on the left, okay? And that will be the 2-point perspective, basically. But you can have a situation like this one where you have buildings that they go in different directions, and you could have many more vanishing points. You could have as many vanishing points as buildings. They are not aligned. They go different angles, okay? So it gets more complex.
But they would all have the same horizon.
That's what thank you very much, because that's what I have here. You can have multiple vanishing points, but only one horizon line, meaning that all the vanishing points, they will meet in the same horizon line. So if you see these 2 vanishing points, they meet in the horizon line. And that's always true as long as the lines that we are taking are horizontal in nature. They are level lines. If you are talking about a stair that goes up, a ramp that goes up or down, that will not follow this rule. That's a bit more complex. But the normal lines that you have in a building, let's say windows, doors, etc., they will go to a vanishing point that's always in the horizon line, and you have to keep it consistent so you can feel that all the vanishing points are in the horizon line or close to it, you know. Honestly, this painting, I didn't measure anything when I did it. I just eyeball everything, and more or less, if you check it carefully, it doesn't go to the exact horizon line, but very close. You know, you can get a bit off that, but in general, it has a sense of the things look realistic because of that. Okay, I'm gonna give you another example here, more complex. For example, this image, you can see this building on the right that you can see only a part of the wall. You see these lines, they are gonna meet in one point, and you see they go down, 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 and get closer to the horizontal. The horizon line probably is around here, and then these go up, up, up. So all these, they will follow the same vanishing point, the wall and the baskets with fruits and bottles. But then the pavement, the ground, has tiles that they go in a different direction because they are not perpendicular to the wall or parallel to the wall. And then if you go to the background, you have this building that goes in a different direction. But you have always to keep consistent with one of the buildings. Let's say, for example, this window, this building, all the windows, they should go to the same vanishing point. Whereas the one on the right, all the lines here, this wall and the baskets, they should go to the same vanishing point. And then the ground, all the tiles, they should go to the same vanishing point. Okay, so that it's how things can get a bit more complicated. Anyway, so if anybody has a question about linear perspective, you are welcome to talk or to put it on the chat. Otherwise, I mean, I will continue with the next thing. Okay.
Okay, there's about
yes,
applying the same ideas in abstract painting. You want to talk about that later or now?
the same ideas in abstract painting. Okay. Yeah, Abby, thank you very much. Yes. Well, you could, if you say completely abstract, or I don't know, but some people, when they say abstract, they mean different things, okay? But you could do something that doesn't look realistic, let's say, and has also a sense of depth, okay? And you can create that with linear perspective also, and could be some perspective that it's not completely realistic. It could have different horizon lines, let's say, and create something that is a bit more surrealistic, let's say, okay, but have a bit of sense of depth. So for an abstract painter that wants to explore depth, but not in a realistic way, I think it's an interesting thing to know the rules. And once you know the rules, you can play with the rules and change them. If I were like an abstract painting, more tending to surrealism, I would say, okay, yeah, I can do a perspective, but then like impossible perspective, like two objects that they look like from different images, from different perspective, but put them together. And then they give you a sense of, I mean, what's this? It's weird. This cannot be possible, right? But at the same time, you are getting a bit of sense of depth. So that could be one of the applications of this to an abstract painting, let's say. Otherwise, I'm gonna continue talking with another thing that it's very important for a realistic painter to create depth is the use of color and values. So I'm gonna now on values. There is color here, changes in color, but let's try to focus just on the values. The values is the different lightness or darkness of a color. Let's say, for example, this rock in the light is lighter than this in the shadow, obviously. So this is a lighter value, and this is the darker value. But there is a hierarchy of values, and the darkest and lightest values should be in the foreground, okay? So in the foreground, you are gonna find the darkest darks, like for example, I'm pointing here to this dark area. So probably this is one of the darkest areas in the painting, okay? As we get atmosphere between us and the subject, you get darks like this dark, but it shouldn't be as dark as this one, okay? You are not gonna get the same type of darks when you are in the foreground as when you are in the background. And this, in some cases in nature, is a bit tricky because you look at something in the background and you know it's a dark rock or a shadow, and then your mind tends to think, I'm gonna do it very dark. But actually it's not as dark as what you have in the foreground, a deep shadow in the foreground. And if you work from photo references, it can be even worse because sometimes the photographs, they tend to do all the darks the same, but they in nature, they will not be the same. And by observation, you can see that something in the background that is dark, it will be less dark than something in the foreground, okay? So therefore, keep your darkest darks in the foreground. And when you go to something in the background that is dark, make it dark, but not as dark as something in the foreground. And if you have different layers, try to keep that consistent. For example, here I have this that is closer to me, then this middle ground, let's say, this more in the background, and this distant background. So in the distant background, don't put something very dark. That will make things a bit flatter, and it will not create depth, okay? So even if you work with photographs, then keep in mind that if you wanna create depth, try to put your darkest darks in the foreground and keep lightening them as you go to the background, okay? Similar thing could be said about highlights. In the foreground, if you have something very light, it will look much lighter than in the background. There are a few exceptions about that, but in general, keep that in mind that you are gonna have the lightest lights in the foreground. So if you see, for example, this rock here, look at the shadow area and the light area. This is in shadow, it's darker, this is in light. Now look at this. This is in light, this is a rock in the light and in the shadow. So you can compare. This one is darker than this. I'm sorry, just going back to. This one is darker than this highlight, this light area. And the dark area, the shadow area, is not as dark as this one, okay? So there are a few things about color. The first one is value. I'm gonna give you another example here. So if you see this landscape, let's focus, for example, this rock. This rock here has an area of light, an area of shadow, okay? Probably is the same type of rock that you have here. So the shadow in this rock is lighter than the shadow in the rock in the foreground, okay? And the light area is not as light as this one. So everything in the background gets more close together. The values are close together. And in the foreground, there's more contrast, there's more range of values, okay? Now, talking about color, another quality of color is the hue. The hue is what we call, green, yellow, blue, etc. So in general, the distant colors, they get cooler. So they get more towards the blue. And when you are closer to you, the same colors will look a bit warmer, okay? So in this landscape, you can see, for example, in the greens. Look at the greens here in the foreground. They are warmer than the greens here in the middle ground. You know, these ones, they have more yellow and orange in it. So it's a green, but it's warmer than the green in here. okay? Or look at the rock. Here we have a very good example because the rock in light is kind of a whitish rock, but it has some color on it, and it has warmer tones like yellowish, pinkish in this area that is closer to us than this one here.
I don't know. Can you hear me? I see a problem with the speakers.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
I don't know, maybe, okay, yeah, I think my AirPods stopped working for some reason. So I'm just gonna switch to the other, but you can hear me well, right?
We can see you and hear you. It's great.
Okay, good. So I was saying that you look at the different type of treatment of this rock. Here is much warmer than here in the background that is cooler. But you can see that if you want to create different layers of light, of depth, sorry, is you can do that. Like if you look at the rocks in the foreground, look at the light area of the rocks in the foreground and how they is cooling more as you go in the back, okay? Or the shadows, even the shadows, if you see in the foreground, you can put warmer shadows, warmer here, and as you go far, you can put cooler shadows, okay? And coming back to the values, you see in the background, see how close the light and shadow areas are in terms of value. They are almost the same value here. Whereas here in the foreground, you see the difference between the light and the shadow area. So there's more contrast of value. There are warmer colors in the foreground. There's less contrast in the background and cooler colors. But there is also another aspect of color that we call saturation. So it's the intensity of color, if a color looks very vibrant. So in general, the colors in the foreground will be more saturated. So look at the greens here. The greens in the foreground, they are brighter than the greens here, they are more muted. So you could add gray, let's say layers of gray as you go to the background. So the background will be less saturated, less intense than the foreground. We're going to see another sample here. Well, in this painting, naturally, I had this path here in the foreground, and you can see how it's warm. But also the green grass is warmer than here, okay? And the rocks, as they go back, they get cooler and they get lighter. And the colors, they get less saturated in the background, okay? Let me see. Now we are going to talk about something that reverses that rule of the coolness, okay? So we mentioned, and we normally say, in the distance, the colors should be cooler. And that's true most of the cases. But when we have sunset or sunrise, where the sun is, the sky is full of warm colors, those colors will affect the things in the background, okay? So for example, here, the greens in the background, that get a bit warmer, okay? So in some cases, that rule of cooler colors in the background, it doesn't apply, okay? But other rules, they still apply. For example, the value is going to be darker in the foreground, no matter how the background is or the sky is, okay? So keep the values darker, the darkest darks in the foreground. And as you go back, less contrast. I mean, the trees, you see more variation here between light and shadow, but here in the background, you don't see much variation, okay? And give you another sample of this. This is a more high-key color painting where it's a sunset. So you see the cool colors are in the foreground and the warm colors are in the background mainly. But the other things that we mentioned, saturation and contrast of value, still applies here, okay? Another sample where in the background, you see this building gets much warmer than here in the foreground because of the effect of the sun, okay? So this is true in some particular situations, but in general, keep in mind that that goes against the rule of perspective, because psychologically, cool colors tend to recede and warm colors tend to advance. For example, if for the question of that person that mentioned about an abstract painter, if you just want to create depth with colors, if you put just flat colors in your painting without representation of images, the cool colors will look like they are farther away than the warm colors immediately, even if they don't represent the sky or whatever, right? So cool colors psychologically make things recede, and warm colors make things advance, okay? Well, before I go to the next item, if anybody has any questions, because now I'm going to stop talking about color. I'm going to talk about something different.
Gonzalo,
Yes.
sometimes you paint what you see.
Yes.
Like the one that's up there right now. When you were looking at that beautiful sunset, you saw those yellows and oranges in the back and the purples and the blues in the front. So you're painting what you're seeing. But the question is, are you also thinking about all of the atmospheric perspective that you just talked about? Or are you just trying to capture what you see?
Well, I mean, as you may know, you learn things, you go to classes, you read books and you practice things. But then the act of painting, it has to be more intuitive, right? And because it has to go more from your feelings, So you have all these things in the background that perspective should be this way. But hopefully at a certain point, you just free up from that and say, okay, even if the perspective is not perfect, it's going to go more in the direction I want to express in this painting, So you have these rules and these ideas in mind, but then you have to play with them. And sometimes because different things, you want to do them a bit different, So in this case, for example, I was not that interested in the depth, although you have a lot of depth because of the perspective of the buildings, and you get that. But obviously doing the sky like so warm, probably much warmer than what I was seeing, right? But I wanted to emphasize that. So I'm reversing a bit the perspective, but I don't care. I mean, in this case, I didn't want to create so much depth, and I wanted to create this a strong sense of light, okay? So that takes me to the point that many times you have to decide in this painting particularly, even if you are a realistic painter, if the perspective is the most important thing, because it could be the color or the shapes or something that it will make things a bit flatter than they are in reality or what they can be, but will emphasize other things, So in a painting, what I will always say is that, is the perspective here the most important thing, or is the color, or is the shapes, or is the brush strokes, And you can decide what to emphasize more in that particular work. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so apart from linear perspective, we talk apart from the color, value, color, saturation, there is these other elements to help you create perspective or depth and in atmospheric perspective. And one is the edges and the texture. So here in this painting, you can see how, for example, this tree trunk is much more defined than this one that it's in the background, And actually you can see how there is a progression. These trunks are much more defined than this one, and then it goes a bit softer, softer, and softer. And if you go to this one here, it's almost like disappearing, okay? So this is a very effective way of creating depth, is making things in the background more blurry, softer, and with softer edges, okay? Sharp edges will make things come forward, and softer edges will make things go to the background, okay? So that's really important, because sometimes we think a realistic painter should define everything very well. But actually, to create a sense of depth, you have to decide what to sharpen and what to give to leave soft, okay? And the same happens with the texture. You see, I could play more with the texture and brush strokes in the foreground, but in the background, I want to leave it calmer and softer if I want to create depth, okay? Another sample here. So if you see, there is a lot of brush strokes and expressive brush strokes in the water, in the front, and in the rocks, okay? In these rocks here in particular. Then here, there's a bit of that, but not as sharp as here. And then if you see the background, it's much softer. Softer edges, less detail, suggesting things. Look at these small houses in the background. I don't know if you appreciate that, but there are some small houses there. It's just some touches of color. Here, this house is a bit more defined, but not that much. And then in the foreground, things can be more expressive, more texture, more dynamic, if you want to create depth. And then finally, I'm just going to give you this sample combining different elements, you know. In this painting, you have the architecture with a linear perspective. So all the houses, they are going to some vanishing point, several vanishing points, actually, because they are not completely aligned. They make a curve. But the vanishing points, they are pointing to this area here, creating also like a focal area in the distance. Then we have other elements, like, for example, a change of scale. The figures are larger here, medium here, and smaller there. We have also more detail in the foreground. For example, look at the stone here. It's a bit more defined than here, and much less defined in this area. We also have warmer colors in the foreground, and as they go receding, cooler colors. Actually, I mean, I painted this knowing that in reality, I didn't see this that cool, okay? It was not as cool, but I wanted to emphasize the depth, okay? Sometimes you just do that. It's just, I don't see it that way, but I want to create more depth, so I put this a bit cooler than what I see. Or I see less detail here than I would see normally. Another thing is the darkness, the dark values. You see the darkest darks are like this door, these three doors basically, or this balcony. But then the doors, as they go farther away, the darks are getting lighter, okay? So all these things that we mentioned before combining in just a single painting, okay? And now I'm gonna show you quickly some example of the process of the painting. So I'm gonna show you how I'm working on this. This is an unfinished painting. I'm working on it right now, but it shows you enough about the process. So I'm gonna quit the presentation and I'm gonna go to a video I have of this, okay? So I hope everybody can see the video. And you see the reference here. As Pat mentioned before, I work mainly with oils and with pastels, soft pastels. In this case, it's a sample with oils. And I'm toning the canvas and starting to draw, okay? But yeah, I'm gonna talk about a few things, but mainly emphasizing the things about depth, okay? So the first thing is that I'm drawing, and you have to pay a lot of attention when you are drawing things that are in perspective. In this case, we don't have lines for the perspective, but we can see that this is closer to the thing in the background. And you have to be very careful because we know, for example, if you see I'm pointing in the photo reference, this mountain here, these rocks, the mountain here, we know it's a huge thing. It's very big in reality, but we tend to draw it larger than what we see it because we know it's big, okay? This can be as small as a rock in the foreground, okay? So it's very important when you draw things in perspective, take other other references to know if that's correct. For example, I would say, if I want to know the width of this, I will go to something in the foreground and make a vertical line and say, it has to fit between this and this, or compare this shape to this shape in an abstract way without thinking this is a big tree or a rock or something, just comparing shapes to make sure that you don't make things in the background too large. And I know we know about this, but believe me, even with a lot of experience that I have, we have that tendency. And then if you compare with your reference, then you realize that things in the background, you tend to make them larger than they are, if they are things that they are big. This goes in the way of you think about, this is a big thing, I need to do it big because it's big, but being in the background, it should be much smaller. Anyway, you can see how I'm doing this underpainting just in black and white with lines. And sometimes what I like to do is put the light and shadow area. So I'm going to move a bit faster so you can see a bit of the process. Okay. So I'm just making marks of where the light and the shadow is. This is a different lecture, light and shadow, but it helps me a lot when I'm painting to differentiate the two areas, okay? And after I do this, I'm gonna just move forward. I'm gonna start with the color, okay? Well, let me see. Here I'm with the color, okay. So basically, you can see I'm painting here, and I'm gonna start, it's a difficult painting because of the subtle colors that it has. And I'm gonna start from the background to the foreground. And I'm gonna start with the shadows. So as you see, I started painting the sky, which is the lightest area in the background. And then I'm even doing a bit lighter now, the sky. And then I'm gonna paint the shadow areas of the rocks. So I'm making a color that is gray down and that it's cool, but grayish and very light, just a bit darker than the sky. But as I move forward to this, the following shadow area is a bit darker. I don't know if you appreciate, because it's just a tiny bit darker. You cannot go much darker there. And then I go to the next areas and I keep doing it a bit darker. Not only a bit darker, I'm putting to the purple, I'm putting a bit of brown to make it warmer. So the same purple color will get darker and warmer as it gets closer to me, okay? So as you see, when it gets much closer, it gets warmer also. And the same thing I'm gonna do with the light areas. So I have all the shadows now, and I'm gonna go to the light areas that are gonna get warmer as they get closer to me, okay? And also more contrasted. And here is when it's very difficult, because those rocks over there, they are red rocks. But in the distance, the red is disappearing, okay? So you can do it a bit warm, but as you get in the distance, that warmth is almost a gray color, not too warm. And as you get closer, as you see, I'm adding more red to it, and things are getting much warmer as I get closer to me, okay? So very tricky, this painting, and but this is the process I use to work, especially on the background, okay? Let's move forward a bit. As you see how the light areas, they get warmer as they get closer to the foreground. And now I'm painting this mountain that is much closer to me than the rest. So what I'm going to try to do is put much more contrast between the light and the shadow areas. So you will see that when I'm more in advance in the painting. But that's my goal, is to put more contrast between light and shadow areas. As you see, I'm focusing on big masses of color, not much detail now. And this is a close-up, and you can appreciate how different is the foreground. This area on the right side, it's the foreground. you see the colors are more intense and there is more contrast between the light and the shadow areas. The colors in the background, the range of value is much closer. Okay. Just gonna move forward. So here you can see the painting in a later stage and see how I'm coming back to touch up things, at the beginning were big masses without much detail. And now I'm going back to adjust those colors, always keeping in mind the same ideas: cooler colors in the background, lighter colors, less contrast of value in the background. Okay. And that's what I'm doing. Also, you can appreciate here how in the very far mountains, there's no much change of value. The only differentiation is a bit warmer and cooler, just a bit warmer and cooler, but basically are almost the same gray. Let me just move forward a bit. I'm doing more detail. I wanted to be more detailed and realistic, but trying to be careful not to put too much detail in the background. For example, look at these rocks here. It's kind of middle ground. It helps you to see the texture on the rocks and be more precise and defined. But I don't want to do the same thing with this one here or this one there. Okay, just showing one, your mind will know that the other ones are similar, and you don't need to do all of them. Okay, and so you have to put more effort in things that are closer to you to describe them, and leave suggested the ones that are farther away. Let me see. Well, it's almost finished. Just wanted to show you this. The painting I have to work more on it, but you can see how it's getting this sense of distance, these different layers of light in the mountains. Okay. Any questions about this painting before I move to the next one? Okay, good. Then are you still there? Yes, okay. No, I will, if there are no more questions in the chat, or I will show you another demonstration, okay?
I have a real quick one,
Yes.
Gonzalo. And you did say that light and color is a different topic, but generally, is there less detail in a shadow area than in a light area?
Yeah, that's the topic. I mean, that it's a different topic, but we see less detail in the shadow than in the light. So that's another thing. That doesn't have to do with perspective, but there should be less detail, and especially less value differentiation in the shadow than in the light. The light area could have more changes of value than the shadow area. Okay, there's always some reflected light and all that, and that's important to have it, but it should be less detail in the shadow than in the light. So for example, if you see here in this area, the shadow area has a bit of variation. So this is a bit red and this is a bit cooler, but in the light area you can see more contrast. Okay, and you can see more contrast of the dark with the light area, especially, more texture. Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Pat. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I'm going to show you another demonstration in pastels. Okay, it's a different subject. So you see the reference here on the left side. Okay, and I'm going to do this in pastels, soft pastels. I'm starting with a pencil, and I'm doing the same thing as I did before, just like this is underpainting. I'm just gonna, as you see it, this underpainting of the light and shadow areas, just with black and white. And then I'm going to start building up the colors, okay, with different layers. So I'm going to move this a bit forward. Okay, so now, for example, I'm going back with color in the shadow areas. And as you see the rocks, as I come from the back to the front, I'm making the darkest darks in the foreground. Okay, so even if the photograph, I painted this from the photo reference. Actually, I went there to paint from life or in oils. I did this painting in oils from life, and then it was very cold, so it was very quick sketch. And then at home, I decided to do the same thing, but to be a bit different, to paint in pastels. But in the photo reference, if you see the rocks in the background, they are very dark in the shadow areas. But if you want to create depth, you shouldn't do that. This is mostly because of the photograph, okay? So keep that in mind. Even if you see dark rocks in the background, do them not as dark as the ones in the foreground. Okay, so what I'm doing now is like an underpainting with blending colors. That's mostly what I do normally, is to blend the colors at the beginning, and then at the end use more like pastel strokes to create more vibrant and defined marks. Okay, but let's go a bit forward. Like, for example, here, one of the choices I had is the trees in the background. In the photo reference, they look mainly warm, but I decided to make them a bit cooler, okay? So my trees are cooler than the ones in the photograph, just to create a bit more depth. And I'm softening the edges in the background also. Let's move forward a bit. You see how things are developing to get more contrast and darker values in the foreground. Now see how I'm getting very dark here, like a black color for these deep shadows in the foreground, and I wouldn't do that in the background. I'm spending much more time in the foreground with detail also. That's another way of creating depth, is putting your efforts in detail in the foreground. Let's move forward a bit. You can see a bit more finished painting, more detail, more work on these areas. Darkening the shadows, creating more darks. And now I'm working a bit on the background. If you see, for example, I added these branches here that they are supposed to be closer to us, and just by the overlapping and a bit darker that they look closer to us than the trees in the background. Okay. Otherwise, the trees in the background, they look very soft. Another thing I'm doing here, for example, in these areas, I'm putting more vibrant colors. For example, the snow, it's not just white, it has colors in it, because otherwise it looks lifeless. Normally the snow should have some reflection of the colors, so I'm putting pink and yellow, orange colors in the snow. The shadows are also a bit more colorful, so you can play with saturated colors more in the foreground. And a lot of more detail in this area of water, and creating like focusing on some rocks that you can see underneath the water, just trying to get a bit of detail, more interest in the close-up area that in the background. And I think that's it. I'm just gonna go back to the presentation where I left that. Let me see. So you can see here the finished painting compared to the photo reference. So there are many changes in color, more saturation in the foreground. Naturally, it was soft in the background. I decided to keep this warm because I like that glow of the trees, the trees in the background. So I keep it warm intentionally, but otherwise I left it very soft in the background, and I accentuated the darks and the contrast of color and saturation in the foreground. Okay. Any questions about this demonstration?
There was one question earlier about how long does it take you to get to the point for in the oil painting, how long did it take you to get to that point when you were doing the demonstration? And how long would it take you to create what you just did?
Okay, about the oil painting, I mean, how long did it take me? I'm not sure. I mean, actually, I could know because I recorded the whole process, because one of the things that I do in my paintings is I record everything, and I share that with my students so they can see it. I'm guessing, I don't know, to get to that point, maybe 4 or 5 hours of actual work, okay, in different days, I guess, but maybe 4 or 5 hours to get to that point in the oil painting. I'm doing it now. And this one of pastel, I don't remember, but it could be similar, maybe 4 or 5 hours to do this one, I guess. Yes. And well, but that's it. I mean, I don't know if there are more questions, just let me know. But I had many more examples. I'm just going to finish with this one, and it's an audience exercise. So, for example, this painting, if anybody wants to talk or put it on the chat or whatever, I will ask you, see if you were paying attention to what I said, is that what kind of things here you see that they help you to create depth, like overlapping perspective, color changes, softness, and which one could be the most important? I don't know. What do you think? Let me see if I'm going to try to see the chat in case. How much at this point? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't see any, I mean, questions on the chat now, recent questions. But if anybody wants to just speak and say what kind of things here you can see about perspective, depth in general.
Size,
Size, size of the
receding, yeah,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
lightening of the color and the blurring of lines as you go back, and warmth to cool.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Thank you, Penny.
Uh,
I see.
and
Yeah.
the-
For example, you say the rocks in the foreground much warmer than the rocks in the background. No, warm to
Yes.
cool.
Mhm, yes.
Otherwise, the water, if you see, it's cooler, let's say, in the foreground than in the background because I mean, because it's that way, but it's more saturated,
Yes.
So the coolest colors are very close to us, like here, because it's the water. But as this color gets to the background, it gets less saturated.
And there's a very strong contrast between the sort of ultramarine blues and the cliff coming down in front of it. So
Yes.
your focus, and with that sort of teal, whatever that is, color as the contrast, and also the way the water moves. The water is moving a lot in the front with the wave breaking, that it keeps your I don't know. There's just much more
More movement.
more
Yes.
movement and detail about the
Yeah.
movement in the front.
Yeah, I mean the water. It's another thing is just you will see more movement in the front than in the background. And you mentioned very well that this sharp contrast here, with the blue color and the cliffs here, it brings you closer to you, right?
Mhm.
Good. Thank you so much. Any other comments?
I have a question, Gonzalo,
Yes,
and it's about the horizon line. You know,
yes,
some paintings or some pictures you're looking at, it's very obvious where the horizon line is.
yes.
Other paintings, you don't see this, you know, differentiation between the sky and the land.
Already on it.
But how do you, I mean, do you take your own visual perspective and imagine your horizon line there when you can't see land and sky?
Yeah, you mean in a place where you have you don't I mean normally if you are in the sea you will see the sky and the water meeting, but normally if you see mountains or buildings or whatever you don't see that. Is that what you are asking?
Yeah, you gave a good example with the one of the paintings that you showed where you had the wall
Yes.
and the baskets.
Yes.
But it's sometimes hard for me to figure out where the horizon line is.
Yeah. Well, if you have especially if you have lines, receding lines, as I mentioned before. Maybe I can go back to that one. Okay, let's just 1 second. I'm just gonna go back to this one. If you have these receding lines, you know, you can imagine where they meet more or less. You follow this one, for example, at the top, and this one at the bottom, and it will meet around here. Okay, okay. So that's actually the vanishing point is where the horizon line is. Okay. Also, keep in mind the horizon line is your eye level, your eye level, meaning
Okay,
that,
yeah.
for example, look at this pot. This pot, you can see the top of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this one, you cannot see it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's because it's higher than you. Okay, so the horizon line necessarily has to be between this spot and this spot, kind of in between, you know, in this area, because you cannot see. So think of the horizon line as your eye level, or imagine just intuitively if you think, who took this photograph or did this painting? This person was much higher than the door, or more or less the height of the door. And I think you can imagine that you can be more or less walking towards that door. And this is because I was painting this standing in front of this door. Okay, I was not in a higher spot. So naturally, because you imagine the person who takes that photo or paints that painting is standing or sitting there, that should give you an idea of the horizon line.
And if
Okay.
you have a horizon line that's very high in a painting, and you had an example of that, but your actual, the place where you're standing is, you're seeing lower than that.
When you're
Do
making,
you go by your own visual perspective?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Can you repeat, please?
Well, there was, and I forget which painting it was, but there was one painting where the horizon, well, I'm calling it the horizon line. The distance between the sky and the mountain, the sky was very high in the painting, mountain was high in the
Yes.
painting.
Yes.
But when you're standing there, you may not be directly looking straight ahead at that point. You may be looking straight ahead at a lower point in the painting.
Yeah.
So
But
do you
yeah.
go by what your height is, what you're looking at, what your imaginary horizon line to you is?
I mean, let me see if I can go back to some painting to explain what I don't know if I understand exactly, but for example, here
That's a good example.
in this one, you know, I'm taking 1 second. I just have too many things here. Okay, let me see. Yeah, here you can imagine that I'm not at the level of the water, right? I'm a bit higher. You can imagine
Yes.
I'm higher than this rock, right? You can imagine that I'm more or less at the level of this rock here, okay? Because I was this is in Great Falls, I'm crossing a bridge in one area, but it was a bit higher. And then the horizon line probably here is around this area because I can see the top of these rocks, but very thinly. I can see the top of these rocks, but for example, I can imagine I cannot see the top of these trees. So these trees are higher than me. So probably the horizon line is around this area here, okay? And another thing that people ask me, I don't know if you had that in your mind or not, but is that even if the horizon line is here, you could decide in this painting, let's say, crop it like here and put a lot of sky. And therefore, the horizon line would be in the middle of your painting, okay? But that would
Right,
not change
okay.
your situation. So you can always, it's two different things. Is where your horizon line is according to the rest of the things in the painting. Another thing is that you, even if you are high up, you could decide, I'm gonna put the horizon line in the middle and have more sky and less of what you see here. You could crop it and not have all this area here, okay?
Okay, yeah, you gave a very good explanation. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And let me see, let's see how I go back. I don't know, I'm just gonna, just in case, I mean, we could talk a bit more if there are more questions, but I just wanted to finish this with a couple of things. Let me see. Just trying to, just moving my presentation. Okay. Yeah. I think I'm just gonna jump. I had several things here, but practical tips, it's just summarizing a bit because we are getting over like the 90 minutes that I thought it was gonna be shorter. Sorry about that, but I'm just gonna summarize a few things. Practical tips that you could use is everything that I mentioned here. First of all, don't underestimate overlapping, placement, and scale, okay? When you draw things, when you decide in your composition that to suggest space. That's the first thing. The second thing is try to know where your horizon line is and the vanishing points, understand them, even if you don't use a ruler or that, ask yourself, and it doesn't have to be perfect, okay, but close to what they are. So plan your receding lines consistently with this horizon line and vanishing points, okay? Third point, reserve your strongest value contrast for the foreground. Darkest darks and lightest lights in the foreground most of the time, okay? Fourth, cool colors and lighter colors as they recede, okay? In general, except the situation where there's a sunrise or sunset, okay? Saturation, fifth point, more intense colors in the foreground. Reduce saturation with distance to convey atmospheric depth. And finally, soften edges and simplify details as forms move farther away. Okay, so these are the things I've been covering here. It's a bit basic. I mean, we could talk a bit more, and there are some exceptions and some things, but this is the basic things that you can, practical tips that you can take away for creating depth in your paintings. Okay, and that's it. I mean, I just have finally thank you very much for being here and for listening to this lecture, for inviting me to the lecture. You can learn more about me by my website. I'm also on YouTube. I have many demonstrations like the ones that you saw, the process of the video, in oils, pastels, and drawings, so you can watch them on YouTube. And in Instagram and Facebook, you can follow some of that. But mainly when I do a video, normally I put it on YouTube, and then I just follow with that on Instagram, on Facebook. And also I wanted to mention that I teach at the Yellow Barn Studio, as Pat mentioned before, probably is that now I'm finishing the fall term, but the next class is the winter term. It will start in January. The registration is already open, and I'm happy to say that most of my classes, they get full very quickly, and they are already almost full. I just have a few spots left in some of them, and you are welcome to get interested about this. I teach on Wednesdays and Thursdays. You see the times here, and I do a class of oil painting and another class of pastel painting, 2 classes of oil and 2 the pastels. And in my classes, we talk about this, actually, this subject of the atmospheric perspective. I cover it a bit in one of my classes recently, and I give lectures, demonstrations. I also do demonstrations. I record my demonstrations. I share with my students so they can understand better the process. Okay, so that's the idea. And I don't know. I just want to thank you again for being there. Many people, many known faces, and names, and so thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
a wonderful presentation. I'm going to pile on a little bit because I enjoy your classes. You have a wonderful way of ferreting out what is bothering you and us about a painting. You know, we work so hard, and all of a sudden you think, wow, this is just great. Then you look at it and something's still bothering me. And, you know, it's the perspective, or this thing is too close and it should be set back and forward. In addition to watching you demonstrate in your mastery, what I enjoy the most is the critiques and, you know, helping me to find out about my paintings.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
I don't know if I think most people on the call know that you are judging our winter juried show. And I mentioned that because A, thank you. B, I know you've already spent so much time and effort, you know, going through the work. But for those of you that would like to meet Gonzalo in person, he's planning to attend our opening Meet the Artist event, which is on Sunday, December 7th. So if you have an opportunity to come to that opening, and many of you will, Gonzalo is right now planning to be with us as well. We'll make some award presentations. So please mark your calendar, 1:30 to 3:30 on Sunday, December 7th. And I know the show's, because of Gonzalo's help and because of the artistry of all of our members, is going to be a beautiful show. One last thing, we will put, when we send out the recording of the presentation, we'll be sure to put some of those contact details that were on that last slide, so that you'll have them. And if there are any other questions or comments, I've thoroughly enjoyed this talk. I know our members have as well. We had a good crowd today in person. Many, many more will watch the recording. Thank you again.
I just want to quickly say that I got to get out more. His work is eye candy for me. It's so much fun to look at. I think we need to book him for a whole separate demonstration on how he solves or uses his how he accomplishes his water. I just think that it's beautiful. I haven't, you know, I've seen techniques that the end product looks like that, but the way he went about it was, I thought, very fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll he's been with us before. He's with us right now, and I hope that we can have him back in the future. Again, any other comments before we say so long to Gonzalo? Okay. Thank you all for attending. Gonzalo, my deepest gratitude. Thank you. And I'll stop the recording. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.